Now let's be real. Walter White didn't break bad. He shattered, and that ending still living rent-free in our heads.
Made up his mind on what he wanted to do, and it tied into the shot that we had that followed this scene on his license plate, which had the phrase, "Live free or die." He was tired of living in isolation in the snowy hills on his own, essentially waiting to succumb to his illness, where he essentially felt as though there were debts that needed to be paid to him before he died, and he wanted to put things right. In the opening scene, we saw him faced with two of the biggest threats to him in that brief moment: his illness, which was slowly increasing the hold that it had on him, and also the authorities that were after him, as was made clear by the blue and red light and the close-up shot on Walt's face, showing us that time was running out and everything was getting closer. "Just get me home and I'll do the rest," was followed by what should have been the first thing that he did, and it was right in front of him. And that was the keys being on top of the sun shield, which then allowed him to make the drive back to Albuquerque and say his goodbyes and also settle the debts that needed repaying. The tape that he put in his car stereo contained the lyrics, "Maybe tomorrow a bullet may find me, tonight nothing worse than this pain in my heart." It showed us what was to come, as the next day a bullet did find Walter White, and the song El Paso summed it up perfectly. Walt's fate was told to us after only witnessing 3.5 minutes of the episode, and it was an opening scene like no other. The first part of Walt's plan was something that we then saw unfold, and it was a trip down memory lane. It tied back to the origin of the show in wanting to make the money to leave for his family, and finding a way in order to give it to his family without the authorities taking it away. But it also went back further than that. It went back to a time where Walt was walking through a life that could have potentially been his if he didn't part ways with the company Grey Matter. The space in the room, the looking at photos, and the calm, composed nature showed the bitterness that was in Walt.
Recap time! Walt builds an empire, poisons a kid, says, "I am the danger," then dies to his own ego.
In the past few
Beautiful.
years. Manipulation, fear, bravery, and flat-out lying to get what he wanted. We were led to believe that there were people watching the house and keeping an eye on the both of them until Walt Jr. would be given the money, but it turned out it was just Badger and Skinny Pete in the distance holding lasers through the window. Walt used an arm of something he'd learned as his time as a criminal to hold the people from his past life, a clean, straight and narrow life, accountable, and it showed how distant he was from the people that he used to associate with. The incorporation of Badger and Skinny Pete was also a nice touch in the sense that we got to see them one final time, and it lightened the mood in that brief moment, allowing the heaviness to be lifted. We then had a slightly different tone and approach in terms of a stylistic perspective that we hadn't seen in the show before: the use of flashbacks in the present day. There were two uses of this in this episode, and they hit hard. We had one of Jesse Pinkman in a woodchopping shed, where it then cut to reality where he was being held captive and being forced to produce for Jack. The grade was different, the lighting was different, the visual appearance of the character was different, and it showed what life could have been like for him if he didn't choose the route that he
The
went
finale,
down. The other one
papapataw nga
that we had
hi,
was when
ngarong
Walt went
sigilang
back to his
closure,
house, which
Walt
was
na
now
ang sangking
abandoned,
last win, and the
derelict, in the
fans,
dark, and had no
emotionally
life at all,
destroyed,
representing
but
his current
satisfied.
situation. And we were seeing him look around the room, seeing moments from season 1 where it was once full of life, celebrating his birthday when he was surrounded by loved ones, referencing the first ride-along that he went on with Hank where he stated, "Get a little more excitement in your life." The excitement which would eventually lead to the dismantling of the family, the home, and his own brother-in-law's life, showing the drastic difference that his life had taken and the emptiness and loneliness that was now present within him in his final moments. However, the ricin was the important thing to take away, as Lydia's habitual nature was something that Walt replaced with her stevia, leading her to eventually be a victim of Walt's at the end. The ricin, which was once intended to be used earlier on and stayed hidden for the duration of the show, eventually came out, and although it didn't take its originally intended victim, it got somebody nonetheless. The iconic New Mexican desert was also something that appeared in the final episode of the show too, right back to where it all began in Season 1, Episode 1, and also near where we saw Hank utter his final words. Walt was building the very weapon which he would use to get revenge on Jack and his gang for killing his brother-in-law and taking his money, although the money was something that we saw was the last of his worries. It was a beautiful inclusion in the episode. Even though so much had happened over the years, this place, despite holding so many bad memories and being iconic for the trouble,
let's talk about the DIY murder robot. Walt really said, "Alexa, eliminate enemies and build a war machine in a trunk."
Showing the love that he had for his family still, even after them wanting nothing to do with him. but it's still reminding us that this was all for them, and it was never supposed to get to this level. Walt's goodbyes to his family made for some extremely emotional viewership as it was unfolding. We had the space that was inside of Skylar's apartment that she was in, with the camera panning in to reveal that Walt was behind the pillar. It was extremely well shot, and the pillar also served another purpose later on in that scene, when we saw it as a divide between the both of them, showing that they were separated from one another, and this was a visual representation of that. They're on two different sides and believing two different things. Whilst Walt did originally start doing this for his family, we saw him finally admit that he did it for himself. He was addicted to the power that came with it, and as he mentioned himself, he was good at it. If he did it for his family, he would have stopped when he made the initial money, but he didn't. It wasn't about that. It was about the buzz that it gave him and the thrill of never being caught. The choice of him saying that he was alive was extremely interesting, due to the fact that he was saying that he was alive at a time where he was quite literally dying. We saw that he got to say goodbye to Skylar, his daughter Holly, and he got to see Flynn off at a distance because Flynn was the individual who couldn't see past what he'd done, and it was a relationship that was beyond repair, and I feel Walt knew that. The despair in Walt's eyes as he looked on at his family one final time was something that was stomach-sinking, and it was here where we knew that there was only one thing that needed to be done. The final scene in Felina was so perfectly executed. It had tension, attachment, history, and vendettas all apparent in one. The master plan of firing into the room from the car was something that we saw almost didn't go ahead due to the throwing of the keys, but we saw it occur as planned. I loved this scene because we saw that even though Walt and Jesse's relationship was in the mud at this point, we saw that Walt was still prepared to save him from being killed. Walt always viewed Jesse as a somewhat son, and I feel when Walt took a look at Jesse and the condition that he was in, he felt the pain that he was feeling and felt somewhat responsible. Walt killing Jack when Jack thought that he had all of the bargaining power about the money was a moment of pure excellence. Mirroring the scene of Walt telling Jack about the money moments before killing Hank, it was now reversed, showing that Walt didn't care anymore. He was done. It was about more than money. He wanted to make the person who killed his brother-in-law pay, and that he certainly did. Jesse and Walt had their final moments standing opposite each other where they shared a passionate exclamation of blame, and Walt saying that he wanted Jesse to kill him. However, we saw that Walt was hit in the crossfire, to which he was content and was prepared to allow himself to die that way. The small look that they both gave each other outside was one that I feel as an audience member, it was so easy to feel, yet it was hard to interpret if it were to be one of happiness, care, or freedom. I like to think that it's all of them, as I believe that they did both care for each other deep down. Walt walking through the lab in the final scene wearing the exact same clothing that he did in the first episode of the show provided a full circle moment. He finished where he started, no better and most certainly worse, with the camera zooming out as he collapsed, mirroring the scene that we saw in Crawl Space a few seasons ago. Walter White was now gone, and the police that were looming at the beginning of the season finale caught up to him and surrounded him in the closing moments. This episode deserves all of the credit that it gets. It closed off a universe in a way that felt natural, poignant, and fitting for all of the characters in the show. Walt didn't get the happy ending, nor did his family. He ruined their lives, but that was the point. You chase for long enough, you get caught. The pacing for the first time in the show was different. Walt wasn't running away from anything. He was taking things face on, and you could feel the lightness that he held, despite the weight of the world being on his shoulders. Consequence didn't matter, and we felt that too. The stylistic choice of flashbacks was something that I definitely appreciated in the episode, as they were paired with moments that contrasted completely. There hasn't been a better finale of a show than this one, and I think it will be extremely hard to top in the future. Felina is what finales are made for, and the farewell to Walter White was like no other. So, there you have it, why Felina was the perfect ending to Breaking Bad. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, theories and predictions, and
Is this standalone ending in TV history? Or do we all just love watching a chemistry teacher turn into Scarface? You decide. I'm just here to overthink it.
And tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of Felina? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.